Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the exact chronological origins of the opioid crisis to understand how the mechanics of this devastating epidemic were actually built.
Listen to this chilling quote from a grieving mother, spoken directly to the architects of this crisis at a 2007 trial. It instantly sets the stakes for the true crime corporate narrative we're about to explore. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost in this epidemic. To understand how we got here, we really need to trace the money, the medicine, and the marketing, right back to the beginning.
Part 1. The Blueprint for Addiction. To see how we arrived at such a massive public health crisis, we actually have to go way back to the 1940s. It's crazy, but a deeply flawed medical mindset developed back then ultimately led to a disastrous pharmaceutical launch in 1996. So in the 40s, three brothers from the Sackler family were working at Creedmoor's psychiatric hospital, administering brutal treatments like electroshock therapy. These traumatic procedures convinced them there just had to be a chemical solution to every mental or physical problem. Basically, a pill for everything. Decades later, that core belief, combined with a brief little letter published in a magazine in 1980, would lay the entire groundwork for the mass marketing of OxyContin.
Okay, let's dive into exactly how this started. The oldest brother, Arthur Sackler, didn't just stay in the hospital. He went out, bought a medical advertising company, and practically invented modern, highly aggressive, and frankly unethical pharmaceutical marketing. He pioneered the practice of hiring doctors to act as salesmen to pitch products to their peers. He paid FDA officials to promote his drugs. He even ran ads featuring glowing recommendations from completely fabricated doctors. It was an aggressive playbook designed from the ground up to move massive amounts of pharmaceuticals. And get this, when severe addiction issues inevitably arose with his early campaigns for tranquilizers like Valium and Librium, Arthur Sackler established a really disturbing corporate philosophy. When pressed about the growing addiction rates, he literally blamed the victims, not his product. This exact mindset would be inherited point for point by the next generation of Sacklers.
Section 2. Approving a profitable lie. Moving into the 1990s, the Sackler family company, Purdue Pharma, was in a tough spot. They desperately needed a blockbuster drug to replace an expiring patent on MS Continent, which was a morphine drug used safely for severe end-of-life cancer pain. So they made a massive pivot. They took that slow-release mechanism, applied it to oxycodone, which is twice as strong as morphine, and aggressively targeted for widespread, everyday pain. We're talking about prescribing it for a bad back or a sore knee.
But to achieve the unprecedented sales they were after, Purdue needed an FDA label claiming the drug was actually safe for everyday use. And they secured it in an incredibly controversial way. Purdue executives literally camped out in a hotel room for 3 days with the FDA's medical reviewer, Curtis Wright. Together, they drafted this incredibly vague, unscientific label, stating that delayed absorption is, quote, believed to reduce the abuse liability of the drug. Believed by who? Based on what science? Purdue never actually conducted any studies on its addictiveness.
And here is the jaw-dropping part. Shortly after approving that medically baseless label, which essentially handed Purdue the golden ticket to claim their drug was non-addictive, Curtis Wright leaves the FDA. A little over a year later, he goes to work for Purdue Pharma, making over $370,000 a year.
Section 3. The deceptive sales machine.
So armed with this deceptive FDI label acting as an official government shield, Purdue deploys hundreds of sales reps across the country, most with zero medical training. These reps were blatantly lying to doctors, telling them that less than 1% of patients became addicted. Now remember that 1980 date from our timeline? That 1% claim wasn't from a peer-reviewed study on OxyContin. It was completely fabricated from a 5-sentence letter submitted to a magazine by a doctor who was observing short-term hospital patients on completely different drugs. The whole thing was a total myth.
Purdue systematically infiltrated hospitals using a calculated step-by-step methodology to manipulate prescribing habits. They spent millions every year just on catered food, essentially bribing doctors and receptionists just to get FaceTime. They distributed literature from supposed independent pain societies that Purdue secretly owned and funded themselves. They paid for doctors to attend lavish medical conferences, to indoctrinate them on the safety of opioids, and they were even handing out free samples of OxyContin right to patients.
But obviously, a massive problem soon emerged. Purdue had promised doctors that a single pill provided 12 hours of pain relief. Well, internal documents show they knew that wasn't true for many patients. So when people inevitably started showing tolerance and terrible withdrawal symptoms before their next pill was even due, Purdue's literature introduced a completely made-up term to the medical community, pseudo-addiction. It's brilliant in the darkest way possible. Purdue instructed doctors that when a patient was begging for more pills, they weren't experiencing true addiction and severe withdrawal. Oh no, they were just experiencing pseudo-addiction because their dose was too low. The medically prescribed cure for an emerging opioid addiction was, incredibly, to just prescribe the patient even higher doses of opioids.
Section 4. Fueling the Black Market.
As this relentless marketing flooded American communities with incredibly potent pills, people very quickly figured out a fatal flaw in the pill's design. If you simply crush the OxyContin, you completely bypassed that protective time-release coating. This gave the user the entire massive dose of oxycodone all at once, creating an immediate euphoria with a purity similar to heroin. It earned the street name hillbilly heroin. And because doctors were handing it out so freely, people would literally just doctor shop across the country to stockpile it. The societal impact of this was just devastating. In regions that were heavily prescribed by Purdue's network of doctors, our sources show that up to 70% of serious crime became entirely drug-related. Pharmacies were being robbed for the sole purpose of stealing OxyContin. Jails were filling up, and overdoses were skyrocketing. Now, publicly, Purdue pretended they had absolutely no idea the drug was being abused like this, but internal emails proved that top executives were well aware. They even ordered employees to delete mentions of addiction from their communications. Following right in his uncle Arthur Sackler's footsteps, Purdue's president Richard Sackler internally blamed the legitimate pain patients whose lives they had ruined. Just listen to this horrific language. He wrote, "We have to hammer on the abusers. They are reckless criminals, the scum of the earth."
Seeing the sheer scale of the damage, this was the exact moment Purdue could have halted production to save lives. Instead, they greedily leaned right into the crisis. Fully aware that patients were developing massive tolerances, Purdue launched an incredibly potent 160 milligram pill. Lower-level employees were actually raising alarms, pointing out that people were already dying on 80 milligrams. But higher doses meant higher profits, and Purdue chose profit.
Finally, Section 5. Profiting while evading justice.
So how did the architects of this whole thing face the legal consequences? Well, in 2007, thanks to government officials who refused to be bought, Purdue was actually taken to trial. They admitted to fraudulently marketing the drug and paid a $600 million fine. But you guys, this was merely a speeding ticket. That exact same year, OxyContin earned them $3 billion. 3 executives pleaded guilty to misdemeanors but served 0 jail time. In fact, the Sacklers gave them bonuses for their trouble. And immediately after the trial, instead of pulling back, Purdue expanded its sales force by another 100 reps to push the drug even harder. Tragically, when doctors finally started to wake up and slow down OxyContin prescriptions after the trial, a whole new disaster unfolded. Millions of highly dependent patients suddenly found their supply cut off. Trapped in horrific withdrawal. 4 out of 5 people who started using heroin during this time transitioned there directly from prescription opioids like OxyContin. The overdose death rate spiked exponentially.
Fast forward to 2020, and nearly every state was suing Purdue. An $8 billion settlement was finally agreed upon. But when you look at the financials, you see the massive shell game the Sacklers played. Over the years, they had quietly transferred over $10 billion directly out of Purdue and into their personal offshore accounts. So when the $8 billion fine hit, Purdue simply declared bankruptcy. The company was just an empty shell at that point. The family that caused the crisis had perfectly insulated their vast wealth from the very company they used to generate it.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Through the mechanics of limited liability and corporate immunity, executives and owners completely insulated their fortunes, while ordinary people and entire communities were left completely devastated. When a carefully orchestrated corporate campaign causes a national public health crisis, who truly pays the price? It's a question we're still grappling with today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.